told you that the world you think exists isn't so? I'm not trying to be a charlatan. I'm not trying to start advocating some sort of conspiracy theory about the world as the Matrix or any of that sort of thing. But no, what if I told you that the world that we think we know of, one that is run simply by ambition, that is dog eat dog, or for someone to win, another has to lose. What if I told you that all of that is an illusion that we create for ourselves, and that there is a deeper reality at work right in the fabric of our world? In Jesus' most famous sermon, the Sermon on the Mount, and the Beatitudes that start that sermon, Jesus is inviting us to something new. That Jesus is allowing for us to see the vision of something where our world can be led and ruled by love and compassion, not so that we lose so someone else wins, but that all of creation exists in a rich abundance of God's grace and favor, if only we can see it. Welcome to the Presbyterian Church in Westfield here in New Jersey, as we begin a new sermon series. This is a sermon series on the Sermon on the Mount, exploring Jesus' most famous words, and as we dive into them, starting to see how it is that Jesus flips our entire world on its head, giving us something new to live for. Join us. Beatitudes form the very opening words of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus' most famous sermon. This is from Matthew's Gospel, chapter 5, verses 1 through 12. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to speak and taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." This is the word of our Lord. Okay, so what does it mean? What does it mean to be blessed? You know, if normal everyday life of like hashtag blessed, for those of you who are uninitiated, if you'll just type into Google hashtag blessed, you will see photo after photo after photo of people with their toes in the sand, or sitting on yachts they don't own but they want you to think they own, or you'll see people living their best life, often of which is simply an image they're trying to portray to the rest of the world. It is false. It is them trying to live up to something, keeping up with the Joneses, whatever you want to call it. But what does it mean to really be blessed? Not to simply try to show a best self to others, but to feel the deep, rich waters of the love and presence of God's own love, of community, of knowing the comfort of other people who care about you, are looking out for you. What does it mean to be blessed? And I think that's the very center of the Beatitudes themselves. You know, there's so many different ways in which we've talked about over the centuries what the Beatitudes are and what they mean, and there's no way in one short discussion today that we'll ever cover the whole conversation, but there are a handful of places for us to start. So right off the bat, there are two very common ways of seeing it. One is called the monastic ideal, and the other is called the impossible ideal. So the monastic ideal, just we're going to get a little bit more academic for just a moment, but the monastic ideal is an idea, a way of seeing or understanding the Beatitudes and the whole Sermon on the Mount, if you will, as being Jesus being dead serious about what he is putting forward to his listeners. But they read it in a way of, these are imperatives, these are things that must be followed, this is the way that life must be lived. And so monastic orders become the way in which people can live their most perfect lives, where they can live most aligned to the will of God. On the flip side, you might have what we now then call the impossible ideal. Very, very important in Protestantism, and originates, or at least is popularized, by Martin Luther and the Lutheran Church. And the idea here is, when Luther sat down and read this part of Matthew's Gospel, of the Beatitudes, and then read out the Sermon on the Mount and what was being asked for by Jesus, he saw such an impossible standard being set that no human being could possibly measure up. And what he saw in it was proof of our need for God's grace. That there's no way one human can do or live this perfectly. So it must be proof that God alone can make this happen, and that it sheds more light on our need for God's grace. So these are two different ways of understanding it. And to be honest, at least for me, I tend to think that neither one is all that helpful to me on a daily basis. So today I want to go back to that original question, what does it mean to be blessed? I guess we could also add to that question, who is the blessing for? So in order to talk about what it means to be blessed, let's start with this other question. So who is it for? You know, there's a tradition, a theological tradition that I've been thinking about a lot in the last several weeks that comes out of the liberation theology of the mid 20th century that has really, I think, been one of the great leaders of thought in the Christian tradition for the last at least half century. And essentially, at the heart of it, part of what's at the heart of it is this insistence on the preferential love of God for the outsider, the poor, those who have been marginalized and pushed to the edges of society. And there's a lot of good reason why this theology not only exists, but touches and is part of the Beatitudes themselves. And it starts if we stop and think about all those times that Jesus gets in trouble with the religious establishment. It's because he's eating and hanging out with prostitutes and the sick, tax collectors, people that the establishment don't think are worthy. And he gets in trouble for this. We also see in some of the parables, we see Jesus naming as the Good Shepherd, that the Good Shepherd will leave behind the 99 to go out and find the one who is lost. We again, in the parable of the 10 talents, we hear of the woman who drops everything, turns over the entire house, flips the house upside down in order to find that one lost coin, and throws a party to celebrate. Over and over again, throughout the New Testament and in Jesus' teachings, we do see this alignment where when we find somebody who's been thrust to the outside, God is seeking to bring back in. But what if you are a person of faith that does not sit on the outside or doesn't typically see themselves as being an outsider? Does that mean that this is not for you? Well, I would argue that the Beatitudes give us an entry point into that. Right off the bat, at the very beginning of the Beatitudes, we hear, "Blessed are those who are poor in spirit." Well, what I love about that is, most days I think that might be me. I can't tell you how many times in my own personal life I've felt that I'm not enough, or that I'm not good enough or righteous enough or perfect enough or any of this. That from a spiritual standpoint, even though I pray and I try to maintain a very healthy spiritual life, I don't feel that I've got it all figured out. And so we talk about this spiritual poverty kind of standpoint, and I find that many of the people that I know, regardless of privilege or position, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of what country they might come from, regardless of sex or gender or any of the other ways that we tend to measure people against each other, regardless of any of that, that first mentioning of blessed are starts with anybody who is coming from a place of feeling spiritually broken down. And there's a promise of good for them. But then the Beatitudes open up for us. And one after another of these statements start to unfold, giving us insight into, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Well, of course the meek are going to inherit the earth. They're going to be the only people left when the rest of us destroy each other. So of course it's going to be left to them. Or think for a moment about, blessed are the pure of heart, for they will see God. Well, in Scripture itself, at least I see in day-to-day life, those who I see as being pure of heart, which I don't see that very often, but when I see people that are pure of heart, like kids often, they see beauty where others fail to. They see love where others fail to. They seek love when others forget to. And when I start to think about when Jesus is preparing to depart and leave his followers, they ask, "Where will we see you?" And he tells them, "Whatever you've done for the least of these, you've done for me." And when we serve, we are seeing, if we have eyes to see, we're seeing the very presence of God in the world. Over and over again, these Beatitudes give us a window, a vision into a world that is so different from our everyday. So what does it mean to be blessed? What does it mean to take part and be a part of the Beatitudes themselves? Well, spoiler alert, in order to be able to talk about that, I have to give you a window into the next couple of weeks. You see, over the next couple of weeks, as we go into this sermon series, we're going to explore what Jesus is really up to in the Sermon on the Mount. Now, the Sermon on the Mount is long and has a lot of pieces, and from a piece of rhetoric, it's actually fairly complicated. There's a lot happening. But at its heart, Jesus gives us a touchstone in our faith. And at the very heart of our faith, at the very heart of practicing our faith, at the very heart of contemplation, of meditation, if we were even to talk about if there was such a thing as Christian mindfulness, and we'll talk about this next week, that touchstone that becomes part of being mindful is love itself. And not love of being a feeling, but love as a way of looking at and living within the world. So what does it mean to be blessed? I believe that what it means to be blessed, blessed are, blessed are, blessed are, all these different groups that Jesus is blessing, are not being blessed because they're on the outside, They are being named because together what they are recognizing is a need for or expressions of a kind of love that is so transformative that the entire world could not help but living in a new way of being flipped on its head by being a part of and living in this new way. And so to be blessed is not to get what we wanted out of life. To be blessed is not to have what others do not have. To be blessed does not mean that we won in some zero-sum game against other people. To be blessed is to be invited into a new way of living. To be invited into a place where you get to be a blessing. Friends, as we start this new journey into exploring Jesus turning the entire world upside down by showing us a new way of life, I hope that you will stop and contemplate, get in touch with me right back on just how it is that you see in your own life daily encounters of the Beatitudes at work, of seeing blessing taking place all around you, of how you've been blessed and how you have been invited to be a part of what God is up to in this world. Amen.